It started with a bruise I didn't cause. A purple mark on his cheek, small, almost nothing, but it was enough. When my brother stood in front of our parents with tears in his eyes and said, "He hit me," I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. Then I saw my father's face twist, my mother's hand pull back, and the laughter died in my throat. No one asked for my side. No one wanted to. They called the police before I could breathe. The officer looked at me like I was scum. I remember sitting in that cold room, hearing my own mother whisper that she was disappointed. That word cut deeper than any sentence they could give me. I didn't hit him. But after that day, I swore I would, not with fists, but with truth. I'd make him feel every second of what he made me live through. Before we continue the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love seeing where my stories reach around the world. We were a house of quiet rules. Shoes off in the hall. Speak softly when father is home. Don't bring shame to the door, ever. My brother, David, understood those rules better than anyone. He learned that tears could be currency long before I learned that truth could be worthless. The bruise was a coin he minted himself. It was a Sunday, cold, heavy air, neighbors drifting home from church like gray birds. I came back from the night shift at the hotel laundry, hands raw, sweater smelling like steam and bleach. David was already in the kitchen with our mother. He had that look he wears when he's rehearsed something, lips slightly parted, eyes damp but not red, head tilted to the side for pity. The purple on his cheekbone was the size of a thumbprint. "Who did this?" Mother asked. "Not to him. To me." I laughed, a tiny, nervous noise, then saw her pick up her phone. David looked down, shoulders curling in. "He shoved me," he said, soft, like he was protecting me even as he offered me up. I fell against the door handle. I hadn't touched him. The last time David and I had been in the same room long enough to argue, it was over him borrowing my card details to buy trainers. He said he'd pay me back. He never did. I kept that fight private because that's what we do here, keep the mess inside the walls and pretend it's not there. Father appeared in the doorway, face heavy with sleep and suspicion. "Is this true?" "No," I said. The word sounded weak in the tiled kitchen. "It's not." David's eyes were glossy, theatrical. He lifted his hand to the bruise, flinched, then quietly shook his head. "It's fine, just don't make it worse." Mother made it worse. She dialed. She said my name in a voice I'd never heard, clipped and official. She told the operator there had been violence. The word hung in the air like steam and wouldn't go away. When I reached for the phone, Father stepped between us. "You've embarrassed us enough," he said. 10 minutes later, the stairwell filled with footsteps and uniforms. Our neighbors' doors cracked open, eyes sliding through the gaps, people who had watched me carry groceries for them, fix their broken railing, carry out their trash. The officers didn't ask many questions. They saw the bruise and the family lined up behind it. One of them, younger than me, kept glancing at David like he was a wounded animal. "Turn around," the older one said. I thought of all the ways that bruise could have happened, a cabinet corner, a fall, the way David drinks and stumbles. I thought of the way he needs to be the center of every room. When the cuffs touched my wrists, the metal felt clean and foreign. In our building, men who get taken away don't come back the same. That's the point. Shame is a solvent. They walked me past Mrs. Varga on the 3rd floor. Her mouth was a flat line. She didn't meet my eyes. Outside, the sky hung low like wet wool. I watched our windows as they put me in the car, lace curtains, a plant on the sill, the shadows of my parents moving in the kitchen. David didn't come to the window. Of course he didn't. He'd done his part. Now he would wait for the story to harden. At the station, I said, I didn't hit him. So many times it felt like a phrase in a language I hadn't learned properly. They asked if there were witnesses. There weren't. They asked about previous disputes. I told them about the money, about the lies that never seemed big enough to call lies. The officer nodded like he understood, then wrote down something that made me look worse. When they finally let me sit in the fluorescent blue of the waiting room, I felt the weight shift inside me, away from disbelief, toward something colder. I saw the bruise again in my head, the neat oval of it, the way David had tilted his face to show it off without seeming to. He hadn't picked a fight, he'd picked a role. And he knew our family would believe it because believing him kept the family clean on paper. In our world, you don't win by shouting the truth. You win by building it piece by piece until it's the only thing that makes sense. I looked at the clock, at the damp cuffs of my sweater, at the fingerprints of steam on my hands, and made a promise I could keep. I would not touch him. I would do worse. I would take the story back. And I would make sure that when he finally told the truth, he did it where everyone could hear. When they released me, the air outside felt thinner, like I'd come back to a world that had already moved on without me. My parents didn't come to get me, I walked home alone. The streets were the same flickering streetlight, same barking dog, but nothing around me felt familiar. Shame does that. It changes the texture of things. The front door was locked from the inside. I knocked once. Then twice. My mother opened it just enough to see me, not to let me in. Behind her, I saw the kitchen light spilling across the floor and my brother at the table, scrolling his phone. His face was calm. Too calm. "Your father doesn't want you staying here tonight," she said quietly. "Not after what happened." "What happened?" I asked. "Or what he said happened." She looked away. "He's your brother." That was her answer for everything. He's your brother. As if blood was supposed to make lies sacred. I slept on the stairwell that night. The concrete was cold, the hum of the building like a slow heartbeat beneath me. Around 2 a.m., David came out to throw trash away. He didn't see me. He was laughing into his phone, telling someone that it worked. 2 words. That's all I needed to hear. The next morning, I tried to talk to Father before work. He didn't look up from his coffee. "You brought the police to our door," he said. "You think anyone here forgets that?" David walked in, bruise perfectly visible, timing perfect. "It's fine," he said softly, hand on his cheek like he was the one protecting me. "I just want peace." Peace. The word burned. By the end of the week, rumors spread through the building, the kind that stick to you no matter what you say. Parents pulled their kids closer in the hallways. The shopkeeper down the street stopped making small talk. Even my boss called me in, his voice awkward and low. "We just can't take the risk," he said. David didn't just lie, he erased me. That night, I stood outside our apartment again, listening through the door. My parents were talking, voices low and tired. My father said, "We'll just give it time. He'll learn." He was right. I did learn. I learned that when the truth doesn't matter, silence is a weapon. I stopped calling, stopped defending myself. Let the lie breathe, let it grow until even David believed it. Because when people build their identity on a lie, they start guarding it like it's gold. They get sloppy. They forget who knows what. And that's when you start digging. Quietly. Patiently. Not for proof. For leverage. They called me back to the station 2 weeks later. By then, the lie had settled, people spoke to me like the verdict was already written. Even my own voice sounded guilty to me when I said my name. The detective this time was different, older, quieter, not trying to scare me. He asked questions slowly, like someone watching for cracks in concrete. "Tell me again what happened that day," he said, pen balanced on his notebook. I told him everything, the night shift, the bruise, the way my brother's voice trembled just enough to sound believable. I watched his eyes. He wasn't judging, he was measuring. When I finished, he asked one question that changed everything. "Do you have proof he's lied before?" I did. I just hadn't thought it mattered. The bank charges. The screenshots. The online orders made under my name, small things, but real, time-stamped, traceable. I pulled up what I had on my phone, hands shaking, heart climbing into my throat. He leaned in closer, studying each image. "This helps," he said. "If there's a pattern, we can request his digital records. But it has to come from calm, not anger. You understand?" Calm. The word stung worse than any accusation. But he was right. Rage had gotten me cuffed, evidence could get me cleared. After the interview, I walked home through the longest stretch of silence I'd ever felt. It wasn't peace, it was focus. Every small lie my brother had ever told, to me, to our parents, to teachers, to girlfriends, became a breadcrumb. I started writing them down. Dates. Times. Screenshots. Names. I didn't tell anyone. Not even when my mother called to ask if I'd finally apologized. That night, I opened a blank folder on my laptop. I named it Proof. And for the first time since it began, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one collecting the truth, one fact at a time, not to hurt him, but to make the world finally see what I'd been saying all along. The folder on my laptop became the only thing that made sense anymore. Each file I added felt like oxygen, something clean in a house that still reeked of accusation. I started small, text logs, transaction emails, screenshots of my brother's messages where he bragged about borrowing my details. Then, slowly, I built a timeline, days, receipts, and witness names that painted the truth in cold, quiet ink. I learned how the system worked. How statements could be amended, how new evidence could reopen an old report. The detective told me to keep everything neat, dated, consistent. Don't fight him in words, he said. Fight him in documents. So I did. At work, during breaks, I filed and printed. At night, I cross-referenced times and bank records. Each line of data felt like a pulse, steady, certain, unarguable. I began to see the pattern. Every time David needed money or sympathy, a story appeared. A lie polished and perfect. One evening, I visited the clerk at the neighborhood market, the one who'd seen David drunk that Sunday night, the night before the bruise. He remembered it clearly, the stumble, the bottle, the fall. He signed a statement. I didn't even have to ask twice. By the time I turned the folder into the detective, it was thicker than the original report. He flipped through it slowly, pausing every few pages. This is solid, he said finally. If his story doesn't match this, we'll know. When I left the station, it was raining, fine, cold drops that slid down my face like something cleansing. I passed our building, saw the lights through our kitchen window. My brother was there again, eating, laughing, untouchable. For now. He didn't know that the truth wasn't just coming, it was already written, sealed, time-stamped, and waiting. It started with small corrections. Not arguments, just facts. When neighbors greeted me with that cautious smile people save for the accused, I'd mention how the case was being reevaluated, how new evidence had surfaced. Nothing dramatic. Just a seed of doubt, dropped casually and left to grow. At work, a colleague asked what really happened. I showed her one screenshot, a message where David joked about scamming people online. Her eyes widened. She didn't say anything, but by the end of the week, 3 other people knew. That's how truth spreads, quietly, like smoke through a locked door. I never confronted him. I didn't need to. Instead, I watched his confidence shift. The way his shoulders stiffened when someone asked an innocent question. The way he started checking his phone more often, like he could feel the story unraveling but couldn't find where. At home, my parents still treated me like a stranger. My mother's eyes would slide past mine, my father spoke to me only when necessary. But I could tell they'd started to notice the inconsistencies. The bruise had faded too fast. The tone of David's voice had changed, too defensive, too rehearsed. Guilt doesn't hide well under fluorescent light. I mailed an anonymous envelope to the detective, copies of bank statements, signed witness notes, and a transcript of the market clerk's account. No return address, no fingerprints. Just the truth, stripped of emotion. The next week, David got a call from the police. I was in the hall when I heard it. His voice cracked, not with fear, but confusion. He thought the story was done, forgotten, buried. But the thing about lies is, they rot. And when they do, the smell reaches everyone. The silence at home changed its temperature. It wasn't cold anymore, it was uneasy, like the air before a storm. My mother had started leaving my food on the counter again. Small things. Quiet apologies she couldn't say out loud. David noticed it too. He tried harder, longer conversations with her, fake laughter loud enough for me to hear. But when she looked at him now, it wasn't with pity. It was with calculation. That's how you know a lie is slipping. People stop defending you and start studying you. My father held out longer. Pride always does. But one night after work, he stopped me in the hallway. His voice was low. They called me from the station, he said. They're reviewing everything again. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just nodded once, as if some part of him had known all along. At work, the distance started closing too. My boss reinstated my shifts, saying, "Looks like there's been some misunderstanding." No apology, but I didn't need one. The paycheck was apology enough. David, though, he began to crack. I'd see him pacing outside the building, on the phone, voice tense and sharp. He'd lower it when I walked by. One night, I caught a fragment through the wall. They said they have proof. What proof? His tone was rising, frantic. The next morning, he didn't come down for breakfast. He stayed in his room with the curtains drawn. My mother called through the door, but he didn't answer. My father didn't press. The house felt like it was waiting, holding its breath. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like the outcast. I felt like the gravity in the room, quiet, undeniable, pulling everything back toward the truth. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Lies don't die cleanly. They claw on their way out. And I could already sense that his would take someone else down with it before it was done. It came from the least likely place, an accident, really. The market clerk I'd spoken to weeks ago stopped me outside one evening. He looked nervous, eyes darting around before he spoke. You remember that night your brother came in? I still have the security footage, he said. Didn't think it mattered until the police called again. My hands went numb. I followed him to the back office, a small room that smelled of cardboard and dust. He played the footage on an old monitor, grainy, time-stamped, but clear enough. David, stumbling, bottle in hand. He tripped, hit the corner of a shelf, and clutched his cheek. The bruise bloomed right there on screen. No one's hand but his own. The clerk burned it onto a flash drive and slid it across the desk. They should see this, he said. I thanked him, but my voice didn't sound like mine. It was shaking, quiet, stunned. I sent the file to the detective that night, no note attached. Just the video. The next day, he called. We've received new evidence, he said carefully. It aligns with your statement. I'll be recommending a full withdrawal of the accusation. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It wasn't joy, just a heavy, exhausted relief. The kind that sits in your chest and won't move. Word spread faster than I expected. The neighbors knew before my parents did. My phone buzzed all day, people who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly asking how I was, pretending they hadn't believed the worst. When my parents finally watched the video, my mother cried silently at the table. My father didn't say anything. Just turned the laptop around and closed it slowly. David came home late that night. His face was pale, drawn. He didn't look at me as he walked past, but I could see it, that flicker of fear. The same kind I'd seen in my own reflection months ago. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits quietly in a file, waiting for its turn. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't need to shout to be heard. It didn't explode all at once. It leaked, slow, humiliating, undeniable. The police retracted the case officially, noting evidence inconsistent with the original complaint. That's all the report said. But in a neighborhood like ours, those few words echoed down every stairwell, through every whispering door. At the store, people stopped looking away. Some nodded. Some mumbled half apologies that sounded more like excuses. You know how rumors go. We just didn't want to get involved. It didn't matter. I wasn't collecting apologies anymore. I was watching reactions. David's job called first. Then his friends stopped coming by. His phone calls turned into arguments, muffled through his door. Every lie has a half-life. His was finally decaying in public. One evening, I found him sitting on the balcony, smoking, eyes red. He didn't turn when I stepped out. You think this fixes it? He said, voice shaking. You think anyone cares about your proof? I didn't answer. He wanted a fight. What he got instead was silence, heavy, deliberate. The kind that leaves a person alone with their own echo. Inside, I heard my mother on the phone, quietly explaining to someone that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. My father didn't speak at dinner anymore. He just chewed in small, tense bites, like the act of eating itself took effort. That night, David's door stayed shut. Through the thin wall, I could hear him pacing, the sound of someone trying to rewrite a story that had already been printed. By morning, he was gone. No note. No message. Just an empty room and a cracked phone charger left in the socket. The first crack wasn't in his lie, it was in his control. And once control breaks, everything else follows. When the letter arrived, it was almost plain, no drama, no warning. Just an envelope from the police department, my name neatly printed in black ink. Inside was a single page confirming what I already knew but needed to see in writing: the allegation has been withdrawn. The case is closed. I read it twice, then once more out loud, like I needed to hear my own freedom spoken back to me. At work, they posted a brief statement. Former employee cleared of all accusations. No apology, no mention of the months I'd lost. Still, when I walked through those doors again, people looked me in the eye for the first time since it all began. One of the receptionists, the same one who used to avoid me, left a cup of coffee on my desk without a word. The detective called, too. I wanted you to know it's official, he said. You handled this the right way. I thanked him, though part of me hated that word, handled. As if surviving an accusation was something you could just manage. The local news picked it up next. Just a small note buried halfway down the site, but there it was, a correction, a name cleared. My name. I stared at it for a long time, not smiling, not angry, just steady. That night, I printed the article, folded it, and slid it under my parents' door. A few minutes later, I heard my mother's soft sobs through the thin wall. My father didn't cry. He just knocked on my door and said quietly, "It's over." But it wasn't, not really. Because somewhere out there, David was still running from the story he'd created, and I had learned something about stories: once they go public, they don't belong to you anymore. The truth had been on record now. Permanently. And no lie could erase it. He came back 6 weeks later. No warning. Just a knock, slow, uneven, and then his face in the doorway, thinner, eyes hollow. I almost didn't recognize him. My mother gasped, my father stood frozen. I didn't move. "Can I come in?" he asked. The words hung there, heavier than any apology. I stepped aside, not out of kindness but because I wanted him to see what he'd broken, the cracks in the family he'd left behind, the silence that had settled like dust over everything. We sat at the table. The same one where he'd once told them I'd hit him. No one spoke. The clock ticked too loudly. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a public statement, the kind you're forced to write when running out of places to hide. "It's for them," he said, nodding toward our parents. "And the neighbors. The truth." My mother took it, hands trembling. She read it silently, a full admission, typed and signed. That he'd lied. That the bruise had been self-inflicted. That he'd done it out of spite, jealousy, the kind of word that doesn't sound big enough for the damage it causes. She started crying. My father turned away, one hand over his face. David looked at me then. "You won," he said. "Is that what you wanted?" I met his eyes. "No," I said. "I wanted to stop losing." He left the statement on the table and walked out. By the end of the day, it was posted on the building's notice board, not by me, but by someone else who'd heard. The lie that had once spread like wildfire now burned itself out in public view. That night, the hallway was quiet again. No whispers. No looks. Just peace, not the fragile kind, but the kind built from truth that can finally stand on its own. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, and realized something simple. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't shout or gloat. It just waits, patient, still, until the world catches up.